Hey everyone, this is Dustin Yager making a little video lesson for you from my studio here in Brooklyn in Bushwick. I'm going to work on some different kinds of surface techniques today that I am excited to share with you. I'm going to start with this simple sgraffito black and white process, which is what I do on a lot of my work. This is some black wash stain that I put on bone dry pots. And this isn't allowed in every studio because it does kind of, it's a little bit explosive. It kind of comes off the clay in the bisque and can get on other people's work, so that's not great. But I fire by myself, so it's okay here. I have this bamboo brush that I use for this stain in particular. It looks like this when it's not dirty. This one I've had for probably almost 10 years and the bristles are very floppy, so I really like how it can wrap around some of these curves and also make nice little like kind of brush mark textures around each pot. So when I'm decorating, I'll usually do these in a little batch. I did a bunch more before this video. And I just make sure that there's some kind of flow, rhythm, something going around each pot. And that I have some big, wide enough area that I can come back and write on for that stage of the process. A little bit later I'm going to show that too, so I'm going to talk about the sgraffito process and how I actually put text and other sorts of marks on here. So one thing that I do is that just simple black and white all over process. The other thing I'm excited to show you today though is painting with some underglaze, which I have all set up here. And I encourage you to spend a minute like setting up your workstation. Sometimes that might be making sure that all of your tools and materials are laid out so you're not fumbling through a bag or something later. It might be making sure that you have a rolling pin or a decorating stand or a clean wear board ready. It's always worth taking 5 seconds or 2 minutes to make sure that your mise is all set up. Then I have this barrel of brushes that I'm going to use. So as I color all of these things and decorate these pieces, which will end up looking something like this, right? So kind of color field, brush strokey, blended mixed colors all the way around a piece. I'll have a brush that's basically dedicated to each of these colors. And those are a lot of different shapes so that each color kind of has its own personality or line quality as I'm going. It kind of sets me up for that. Some of these brushes are not very good for this. This one, too big. This one, a little bit too big, might not use. This one, too small, too hard, can't do it. Favorite brushes for this are, sometimes a bamboo brush similar to this one is okay. I actually really like these fan brushes that are made and sold by Amico. They're pretty good. This similar size fan brush is made by Dick Blick, but it doesn't have like as many fibers, so they kind of get flimsier, floppier, weaker. It doesn't stretch around each form quite as well. So I'll use several fan brushes on these. I have this stiff brush, which is good, I think, especially for some bigger forms where I want more distinct blending kind of line marks. Brush strokes, maybe I'll use that one. I have some of these calligraphy bamboo brushes, which can be wide flat line or also hold a point really nicely when they're wet. So that can be a good kind of second choice after that bamboo brush. And then I always have a couple of these stiffer fan brushes that have short, really firm fibers on them, which are nice for textures kind of as a final layer on top of something. Maybe the last brush I need to tell you about is this dagger brush that is cut at an angle so that it makes lines that very, very easily. They kind of, it's hard to make them just one easy, consistent width all the way down, so it gives a lot of personality and distinct line quality to a color as well. This I probably won't use. This style of brush I like to use just for the wax stage. It's very crispy because it has wax all over it. So as I get started, I'll just have a little pile of brushes here and then grab them as I need them. And I've set up for myself, you know, I have like a dozen things that I want to paint all over with colors today. I think we'll start with this face. And I just kind of jump right in. When I started doing these kinds of paintings, I didn't think too much about it, about the composition, about how the colors look together, about how the color wraps all the way around the piece. I just did a bunch, and then I think as I would get all the way through the decorating process and fire them and see them come out, it was easier to evaluate what was working, and maybe as importantly, why it was working. And then it comes back to pretty normal sorts of things that you think about in compositions, right? I think the balance of light and cool colors is really important. Light and cool colors. Bright, like warm and cool colors, so I make sure I'm balancing the reds and yellows and this beautiful dark orange with things like the seafoam green, which is a underglaze that I mix together to get that tint, and light blue and white and light yellow and all these other sorts of things. I also know that when I come to put words on something like this with that black stain again, the black stain doesn't have quite enough contrast against darker colors. So I know that I don't want to have too many patches of this darker blue or a dark green or a dark purple, because it's going to interrupt my ability to have a legible message after the fact. When I was setting up all of these colors, I shook each bottle before I opened it up. And most of the underglazes that I use are Emiko velvet underglazes. There's one stranger here, which is a speedball glaze that's melon. That's just a nice bright shade of pink. You can see this. So here we go. This is first base layer of just painting. Pretty happy with that. I can tell that some layers are going to be a little bit thin, some are going to be very opaque. Satisfied. Then do another one. Since I think of this as kind of an all-over composition, I guess sometimes I have to kind of break out of my head of, it doesn't have to be all big brush strokes all over the entire thing. Sometimes I'll come in and do something more specific that might be decorating just this side with a rainbow kind of shape or a distinct kind of striped section of a pot, or something like polka dots that are going to be maybe a little bit obscured by other things. This is that dagger brush that makes nice lines that I like. This is a little bit less opaque composition, turns out. But I think I'm happy with it. It's going to have a lot more white areas showing and a lot more light colored things going on. The pattern also has a lot more distinct lines instead of blocks of color. Okay, that's fine. Let's do another one. The big rule that I break here and just don't think about is I double dip in my underglazes. So I might put a first saturated layer of orange on my brush. I kind of like it with white, a little creamsicle. So I can dip white on top of that and then they'll sort of blend together as I paint. When I do that double dip, yeah, it leaves a little bit of orange in the barrel, but who cares? It's just me. So I get this sort of blending effect for something like that. I could also try orange with like maybe a little bit of light blue on the side. How does that smear and blur together? And that can make interesting contrast kind of gradient. I just need to make sure that I'm not getting 5 different colors on this brush because it will blur kind of gray and horrible. So there's a mix of isolated bright colors and then those colors that are playing against each other in a wet way where they're blending and dripping and running and smearing together as well. Since I'm painting this onto bone dry pots, my underglaze is drying really quickly, which means that I can handle this and kind of turn it around and pinch it in areas that I can see are already dry. I do just try to keep, especially my left hand, very clean so that as I'm flipping it around, I'm not leaving purple fingerprints all over where I didn't intend them to be. Okay, let's see if I can finish this. Maybe with some green. Okay, those are 3 vases, and then I'm just going to do this one tumbler shape. Maybe as a challenge to myself. Keep it simple. I like to start with maybe just some blurry white and put it on so it'll be a little bit thick and stay a little bit wet, and then come back and blend into that. So I'm thinking about how can I make a very pastel-based cup, pastel-based composition that's very light and simple. And I know that this lilac color, fire's a little bit iridescent just on its own, kind of barely there, iridescent. And I like it for that. Some yellow and white together. Too much yellow. So maybe that's going to be a simple sort of something. Okay, I'm going to paint a few more for a minute and then I'm going to come back, we're going to reset, and we're going to do text incising layers of other goop on this material.